Bewildered alien eyes tracked the cockroaches scurrying about the filthy fast food kitchen, moments before a human worker stomped the chitinous pests into gelatinous pulp. "Where I'm from, bugs that size could devour that man whole," Ambassador Korvac squealed, his scaly face grimacing at such primal human brutality. Sergeant James Taylor, Korvac's military escort, smirked wryly. "Welcome to Earth, now come on." Weeks earlier, an emergency alert had rousted James from bed. Hustling to the top-secret base, the sergeant listened intently as the general outlined their predicament. Aggressive extraterrestrials were threatening Earth with total incineration unless mankind proved itself worthy in Ambassador Korvac's eyes. Apparently, Earth's myriad hazards had the high and mighty starfarers second-guessing humanity's right to exist. "We've got one shot at this, Taylor." The gruff general leveled his gaze. "Squire that ornery alien across our planet and show him humans are the toughest bastards this side of the Milky Way. Fail, and 7 billion lives fry with our little blue marble." No pressure. Ferrying an ill-tempered space toad who'd sooner see you entombed in radioactive ashes than actually enjoy the damned chicken nuggets he gagged on at every stop. Worse, Taylor knew the slippery alien spit lies between those needle-like teeth. Any perceived frailty could spell doom for humankind. One slip-up, and the Yadaran fleet would crack Earth like an egg. The ambassador wasn't here to assess. He was scouting targets, plotting extinction. While not on James Taylor's watch, he'd showcase exactly how humans not only survived but thrived on this death trap of a planet, even if it killed them both in the process. "Still hungry, Your Excellency?" Taylor offered with a sneer. "There's a sushi joint next door. The fugu fish packs a punch even your pansy-ass biology couldn't possibly stomach." The next leg of their journey had James and Korvac trekking through the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Sweat clung to James's brow as he macheted through the dense undergrowth, Korvac trailing behind him. Alien eyes darted suspiciously at every rustle in the foliage, clearly on edge in this unfamiliar environment. "We should have taken my ship," Korvac grumbled. "Covered this distance in minutes." James glanced back, a wry smile on his face. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, if you want to see what humans are made of, you gotta get your hands dirty." As the sun began to set, James located a small clearing and set to work building a shelter using branches and broad leaves. Korvac watched, unimpressed, as the sergeant rubbed 2 sticks together to start a fire. "Primitive," the alien scoffed. "My people mastered fusion power eons ago." James just shrugged, coaxing the embers into a steady flame. He then set about foraging for edible plants and setting rudimentary traps to catch small game. Korvac remained seated on a fallen log, fiddling with his malfunctioning tech. Suddenly, a clap of thunder echoed through the jungle, followed by a torrential downpour. James quickly ushered Korvac under the shelter, but the alien's equipment was thoroughly soaked, rendered useless. "Guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way," James remarked, stoking the fire. As they huddled beneath the makeshift roof, the crackle of branches caught their attention. James peered into the gloom, spotting a group of men with chainsaws and heavy machinery, illegal loggers. Without hesitation, James sprung to his feet and charged at the intruders. Fists flew as he engaged the loggers in fierce hand-to-hand combat, his movements fluid and precise. Korvac observed from a distance, taken aback by the human's willingness to put himself in harm's way for the sake of some trees. After a brutal scuffle, James emerged victorious, the loggers fleeing into the night. He returned to the shelter, knuckles bloodied but head held high. Korvac studied him thoughtfully. "You could have been killed. Why risk it?" James met his gaze. "Because it's the right thing to do. This planet, these forests, they're a part of us, and we'll fight like hell to protect them." As they settled in for the night, Korvac found himself reassessing his initial judgment of humans. Perhaps there was more to these creatures than their primitive technology and brash demeanor suggested. After braving the perils of the Amazon, James and Korvac's global odyssey led them to the sun-scorched expanse of the Sahara Desert. The alien struggled to adapt, his scaly hide blistering under the relentless heat. James, more at home in Earth's harshest environments, showed Korvac Bedouin secrets for surviving the unforgiving sands, how to wrap one's head to ward off heatstroke, where to dig for precious water. Trekking through the dunes on camelback, they stumbled upon an ancient tomb, its entrance barely visible beneath the shifting sands. Curiosity piqued, they ventured into the cool, dark depths. Hieroglyphs covered the walls, but these were no ordinary etchings. They unmistakably depicted an alien visitation in Earth's distant past. Korvac studied the carvings intently, realization dawning. His own species, it seemed, had a hand in guiding humanity's early civilization. The implications were staggering, but he kept this revelation to himself. There would be time to process it later. As they emerged from the tomb, squinting against the harsh sun, a flurry of laser blasts sent them diving for cover. Rival alien scouts had tracked their movements, lying in wait to ambush them. James and Korvac were outnumbered and outgunned. "Any bright ideas?" James shouted over the din of energy weapons. Korvac glanced at his malfunctioning tech, then at the weathered human beside him. "We do this your way." With a nod, James leapt into action. He fashioned a crude sling from his shirt, hurling stones with deadly accuracy at their assailants. Korvac provided covering fire with his sputtering blaster. It was a dance of human ingenuity and alien tech, the two unlikely allies working in tandem. Amid the chaos, a stray blast caught Korvac in the chest, sending him sprawling. James, heedless of his own safety, charged through the laser fire and dragged the wounded alien to shelter. He stanched the bleeding with sand and tore strips of fabric, keeping Korvac alive through sheer grit and battlefield medicine. As the last of their attackers fell, Korvac stared at James in disbelief. You saved my life. Why?" James met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because it was the right thing to do. We humans, we look out for each other, even ornery space toads like you." Something shifted in Korvac's eyes, a grudging respect kindling. Perhaps he had underestimated these humans. Perhaps there was more to them than met the eye. Battered but unbroken, they mounted their camels and rode off into the shimmering horizon, ready to face whatever challenges Earth had in store. From the sun-baked Sahara, James and Korvac's odyssey brought them to the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. The biting cold and thin air were a stark contrast to the desert's scorching heat, but James was determined to show Korvac the indomitable human spirit. As they trekked up the treacherous slopes, James regaled Korvac with tales of intrepid mountaineers. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, first to summit Everest back in '53, faced the mountain's wrath head-on, risked it all to stand on the roof of the world. Korvac listened intently, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "And this feat, it is considered a great achievement among your kind." James nodded. "Pushing the limits, testing ourselves against nature's might, it's in our blood. We're explorers, pioneers." The alien mulled this over as they climbed higher, the wind howling around them. Perhaps there was more to these humans than met the eye, a resilience that belied their frail forms. Suddenly a deafening roar shattered the icy stillness. James's head snapped up, eyes widening in alarm. "Avalanche!" A tsunami of snow hurtled towards them, an unstoppable force of nature. James reacted on instinct, shoving Korvac towards a narrow crevice in the rock face. They huddled together as the avalanche thundered past, a maelstrom of ice and debris. When the chaos subsided, James peered out at the altered landscape. Their path was blocked, buried under tons of snow, and Korvac, the alien, lay crumpled beside him, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. James sprung into action, his training taking over. He splinted Korvac's leg with trekking poles and strips of fabric, his hands steady despite the dire situation. The alien hissed in pain, his scaly skin paling. Why are you helping me?" Korvac rasped, his voice strained. "I am your enemy, your prisoner." James met his gaze unflinchingly. "You're my responsibility, and I don't leave anyone behind." They were stranded on a narrow ledge, the way forward an impossibility. James fired off a distress beacon, but help could be days away. In the meantime, they would have to rely on each other to survive. As night fell, James huddled close to Korvac, sharing what meager warmth they could muster. The alien shivered violently, his cold-blooded physiology ill-suited to the frigid temperatures. "Tell me about your world," James said, trying to keep Korvac conscious. "Your people, your culture." Korvac's eyes glazed over, his mind drifting. "Yadara, a planet of towering cities and advanced technology. We have conquered the stars, bent the very fabric of space-time to our will." James listened intently, fascinated by this glimpse into an alien civilization. In turn, he shared stories of Earth's history, of the triumphs and tragedies that had shaped humanity. As the long hours stretched on, a grudging respect began to form between the two adversaries. They were from different worlds, different species, but in this moment of shared struggle, they found common ground. Dawn broke over the mountains, casting the snow in shades of pink and gold. James checked Korvac's leg, relieved to see no sign of infection. The alien stirred, his eyes clearer than they had been the night before. I may have misjudged your species," Korvac admitted, his voice rough. "You are more than I gave you credit for." James allowed himself a small smile. Humans are full of surprises. They settled in to wait, two unlikely allies bound by the unforgiving mountains and the shared will to survive. The journey was far from over, but something had shifted between them, a bridge spanning the gulf of space and prejudice. Help arrived in the form of a search and rescue helicopter, airlifting James and Korvac from their icy prison. As they thawed in the chopper's heated interior, Korvac turned to James. "Your world, it's harsher than I ever imagined, but so are its people." James cracked a weary smile. "We've had to be. Earth doesn't make it easy." Their next destination offered a stark contrast to the unforgiving peaks, the vibrant, teeming waters of the Great Barrier Reef. James, an experienced diver, guided Korvac through the kaleidoscopic wonderland of coral gardens and darting schools of fish. Even the alien, with his advanced undersea tech, found himself transfixed by the raw, primal beauty. Korvac marveled at the delicate balance of the ecosystem, watching a barracuda dart past a swaying anemone. So much life, all interconnected. And your kind, you've learned to coexist with it. James nodded, his voice distorted through the rebreather. "It's not always easy. We've made mistakes, but we're learning, trying to be better stewards." Their peaceful exploration shattered when James spotted a group of figures in the distance, their bulky equipment out of place among the graceful reef. Heart sinking, he recognized the telltale signs of poachers. Rare fish and precious coral vanished into their nets, the delicate balance disrupted by human greed. Fury propelled James through the water, Korvac struggling to keep up. The sergeant charged the nearest poacher, ripping the net from his hands. They grappled, a storm of bubbles and flailing limbs. James felt a sharp pain in his side, a knife slicing through his wetsuit. Gritting his teeth, he lashed out, his fist connecting with the poacher's jaw. The man went limp. Korvac, still weakened from his injuries, fumbled with his alien tech. A pulse of energy rippled through the water, shorting out the poacher's equipment. Their lights flickered and died, leaving them disoriented in the sudden gloom. James seized the advantage, dispatching the remaining poachers with brutal efficiency. When the last one floated unconscious, he turned to Korvac. "You okay?" The alien nodded, eyeing the dark cloud of blood billowing from James's wound. "You're hurt." "I'll live," James grimaced. "We need to get these scumbags to the authorities." They zip-tied the poachers and hauled them back to the boat, Korvac's tech serving as an impromptu propulsion system. As they broke the surface, James radioed in the incident, ensuring a welcoming party would be waiting on shore. On the journey back, Korvac was uncharacteristically quiet. When they reached the dock, he turned to James. I was wrong about your species. The way you fought for this reef, risking your own life." James shrugged, wincing as the motion pulled at his wound. "We're all part of the same ecosystem. What affects one affects us all." Korvac shook his head. "My people, the Yadaran, I fear we have misjudged humans, seen you as primitive, reckless, but there is a nobility to you, a selflessness." James clapped him on the shoulder. "Careful, you're starting to sound like you actually like us." Korvac didn't smile. His gaze was distant, troubled. "My mission, I'm starting to question its very purpose." As the authorities hauled away the poachers, James and Korvac stood on the dock. An alien and a human united by a newfound understanding. The journey had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but it had also forged an unlikely bond. And for Korvac, it had planted the seeds of doubt, a creeping uncertainty about the rightness of his people's plans. The sun dipped towards the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. James turned to Korvac. "Where to next?" Korvac looked to the stars, as if seeking answers in their distant light. "Somewhere that will give me clarity, help me understand the true nature of your kind." James nodded, a glint of determination in his eye. "Then I know just the place." Neon signs flickered and glowed, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the rain-slicked streets of Tokyo. James and Korvac navigated the bustling crowds, the alien's eyes wide as he took in the sensory overload of the city. "This place, it's like nothing I've ever seen," Korvac marveled, ducking to avoid a low-hanging banner. "How do you even begin to find our target in this chaos?" James smirked, pulling out a sleek device from his pocket. "By playing their game." His fingers flew across the screen, lines of code scrolling past. "I'm tapping into the city's surveillance network. Facial recognition should give us a lead." Korvac watched, impressed, as James hacked the system with ease. "Your technology, it's more advanced than I gave your kind credit for." "We're full of surprises." James' eyes narrowed as a match flashed on the screen. "Got them. A Yakuza front in Shinjuku. Let's move." They wove through the neon-drenched alleys, James's network of local contacts feeding them intel through earpieces. As they neared the hideout, a prickling sense of unease crept up James's spine. It was too quiet. The ambush came from all sides, heavily armed thugs pouring from the shadows. James reacted on instinct, dropping into a fighting stance. He engaged the nearest attacker, parrying a vicious knife thrust and retaliating with a bone-shattering elbow strike. Korvac dove for cover, his alien blaster spitting searing bolts of energy at the Yakuza. The air crackled with the scent of ozone and singed flesh. James was a blur of motion, his martial arts skills honed to deadly perfection. He flowed from one opponent to the next, leaving a trail of broken bodies. A thug leveled a gun at his head, but James was faster. He disarmed the man with a lightning-quick strike, the weapon clattering to the ground. Together, James and Korvac fought their way into the hideout, a trail of groaning bodies in their wake. Inside, they found crates of alien artifacts, technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. As James rifled through the crates, a glint of metal caught his eye. He picked up a strange device, a holographic display springing to life. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Korvac, you need to see this." The alien peered over his shoulder, his eyes widening in shock. The display showed a group of Yadurans, their features twisted in anger. They were speaking in their native tongue, but James's translation software passed their words. "The humans are not to be underestimated. We must accelerate our plans before Korvac's foolish mission jeopardizes everything." Korvac stumbled back, his face ashen. "A rogue faction working against me, but why?" James gripped the device tightly. "I don't know, but we need to find out. This changes everything." They gathered the evidence and slipped back into the neon-soaked night, the weight of this new revelation heavy on their minds. As they sped away from Tokyo, Korvac stared out the window, his thoughts a jumble of doubt and betrayal. Had his own people been working against him all along? And if so, to what end? The questions gnawed at him as the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by an uncertain future. The bitter Arctic winds howled across the desolate expanse of ice and snow as James and Korvac trudged forward, their faces raw and chapped from the relentless cold. Hunkered against the merciless elements, they pressed on, driven by a shared determination to uncover the truth behind the insidious Yaduran conspiracy. James, no stranger to extreme environments, took the lead. He guided Korvac in the ways of Arctic survival, his words clipped and precise over the roar of the wind. "Watch me," he instructed, packing blocks of hard snow into a compact dome. "This is how you build an igloo. It'll keep us alive out here." Korvac, his scales brittle with frost, nodded grimly. He mimicked James's actions, his clawed hands fumbling with the unfamiliar task. Together they erected a small shelter, a fragile bubble of warmth against the vast, frozen wasteland. As they huddled inside, James pulled out his knife and a coil of wire. "Now I'll show you how to set snares. We need food to keep our strength up." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, crafting crude but effective traps from the scavenged materials. Hours bled into days as they scoured the icy landscape, searching for signs of the hidden Yadaran base. They subsisted on meager catches of Arctic hare and the occasional Arctic fox, their bodies growing leaner and harder with each passing day. Finally, as the wan Arctic sun hung low on the horizon, they spotted it, a glint of metal protruding from a sheer cliff of ice. James motioned for Korvac to take cover behind a snowdrift as they approached, their senses honed to razor sharpness. Suddenly the ice around them erupted in a hail of laser fire. Yadaran rebels, clad in thermal armor and armed with advanced weaponry, swarmed from concealed positions. James reacted instantly, diving for cover and returning fire with his pulse rifle. Korvac, torn between shock and anger, hesitated for a split second before joining the fray. His own weapons spat searing bolts of energy at the attackers, felling them in droves. Side by side, human and Yadaran fought as one, their differences forgotten in the heat of battle. Amidst the chaos, a familiar figure emerged from the rebel ranks. Korvac froze, his weapon lowering a fraction. "Zorvan, brother, what are you doing?" The rebel leader, his features a twisted mirror of Korvac's own, sneered. "What I must for the glory of Yadara. You've grown soft, brother, weak. These humans have poisoned your mind." Korvac shook his head, his eyes hardening. "No, they've opened my eyes. We've been wrong about them, Zorvan, so very wrong." Zorvan raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at Korvac's chest. "Then you will die with them." Time seemed to slow as Korvac stared down the barrel of his brother's gun. In that moment, he saw the path before him with crystalline clarity. He made his choice. Korvac lunged forward, tackling Zorvan to the ground. They grappled in the snow, a tangle of limbs and snarls. Zorvan fought with the strength of madness, but Korvac had the power of conviction. With a final, wrenching twist, he subdued his brother, pinning him to the icy ground. Around them, the battle had turned. The rebels lay dead or dying, cut down by James's unerring aim. The human soldier stood tall amid the carnage, his eyes meeting Korvac's with a silent nod of respect. Together, they entered the base, picking their way through the eerie, abandoned corridors. What they found within defied belief. Tanks of liquid, each containing a grotesque hybrid of human and Yadaran DNA. A twisted experiment in genetic engineering aimed at creating the ultimate soldier. Korvac recoiled in horror, his stomach churning. "What have we done?" James placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm. "What you had to, now we make it right." They planted explosives throughout the facility, rigging it to blow. As they fled the base, the ground shook with the force of the detonation, a plume of fire and debris rising into the Arctic sky. Korvac watched the smoke billow, his heart heavy with the weight of his actions. He had betrayed his own kind, but in doing so, he had perhaps saved them from themselves. And in James, he had found an unlikely ally, a friend forged in the crucible of battle. The Arctic winds whipped around them as they set out across the frozen waste, two figures silhouetted against the endless white. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together, human and Yadaran, united by a bond stronger than species or creed. James and Korvac burst into the stolen shuttle, their breath ragged with exertion. James's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I hope you know what you're doing," Korvac muttered, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. "I've flown worse," James replied, a hint of a grin tugging at his lips. The shuttle shuddered to life, lifting off from the icy surface and streaking towards the looming Yadaran mothership. As they approached, alarms blared through the cramped cockpit. "They've spotted us," Korvac hissed, his claws tightening on the armrests. "Then we'll just have to move fast." James banked hard, dodging a volley of laser fire. The shuttle skidded into the mothership's hangar, sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. No sooner had they touched down than a swarm of Yadaran guards descended upon them, weapons drawn. James was out of his seat in a flash, his body a blur of motion. He slammed into the first guard, his fists a flurry of strikes. Bone crunched under his knuckles as he dispatched one foe after another, their bodies crumpling to the deck. Korvac, meanwhile, hunched over a console, his claws flying over the holographic keys. "I'm in," he called over the din of battle. "The lab is on the lower decks, but the security is tight." James grunted, slamming a guard's head into a bulkhead. "Then we'll just have to hit them harder." They fought their way through the ship, James leading the charge. His moves were brutal, efficient, honed by years of training. Yadaran guards fell before him like wheat before a scythe, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. At last they reached the lab, the doors hissing open to reveal a figure from Korvac's past. Zorvan, his former mentor, stood before a row of tanks, each containing a grotesque hybrid of human and Yadaran DNA. "Korvac, my star pupil," Zorvan purred, his eyes glinting with cold amusement. "I always knew you would return to us." Korvac stiffened, his jaw clenching. "I'm not here to join you, Zorvan. I'm here to stop you." Zorvan chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Stop me? My dear boy, you don't understand. This," he gestured to the tanks, "is the future. The Yadarans and humans, united as one. Imagine the power we could wield." James stepped forward, his fists clenched. "The only thing you'll be wielding is a prison sentence." Zorvan's gaze flicked to the human, his lip curling in disdain. "Ah yes, your pet primate. I must say, Korvac, I'm disappointed in your choice of companionship." Korvac drew himself up, his eyes hard. "James is no pet. He's a warrior and a friend. Something you could never understand." Zorvan shook his head, a mocking smile playing across his features. "A pity. You could have been great, Korvac. A leader of the new Yadaran Empire. But if you insist on siding with these savages—" He pressed a button on the console and the tanks began to drain. "Then you will die with them." The hybrids stepped forth, their muscles rippling under pale, mottled skin. Their eyes were blank, soulless, filled only with the desire to kill. James and Korvac exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Then as one they charged, plunging into the fray with a roar of defiance. Fists and claws flew as they battled the abominations, the air ringing with the sounds of combat. James was a whirlwind of motion, his every strike precise and deadly. He ripped the head from one hybrid, then spun to drive his fist through the chest of another. Beside him, Korvac fought with equal ferocity, his alien strength more than a match for the genetically enhanced monstrosities. But the hybrids kept coming, wave after wave of them pouring from the tanks. James felt his strength beginning to flag, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He glanced at Korvac, saw the same weariness etched in the alien's features. They were losing ground, being driven back towards the far wall. The hybrids pressed in, their blank faces twisted into snarls of rage. James knew they couldn't hold out much longer. They needed a plan, and fast. James' eyes darted around the lab, searching for a way out. Then he spotted it, a narrow corridor leading deeper into the ship. "Korvac! This way!" They sprinted down the passage, the sounds of the creature's rampage echoing behind them. Bulkheads buckled and alarms blared as the abomination tore through the ship's innards. "The engine room," Korvac shouted over the din. "If we can lure it there—" James nodded grimly. "I'll draw its attention. You get to the reactor controls." They burst into the cavernous engine room, a labyrinth of pipes and thrumming machinery. James positioned himself in the center, waving his arms. "Hey, Ugly! Over here!" The creature lumbered into view, its misshapen bulk filling the doorway. eyes that were neither human nor Yadaran fixed on James with predatory intent. James stood his ground, every muscle coiled for action. "Come on then, you bastard!" With a roar that shook the deck plates, the creature charged. James dove aside at the last second, rolling and coming up in a fighting stance. The hybrid's momentum carried it past, straight towards the shielded reactor core. Korvac's claws flew over the control panel, overriding safety protocols. The reactor thrummed with barely contained power, a miniature sun straining at its bonds. James danced around the creature, delivering punishing blows that would have felled any human opponent. But the hybrid barely seemed to feel them, its unnatural biology shrugging off the impacts. A massive fist caught James in the chest, sending him flying. He hit the wall hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Through blurred vision, he saw the creature advancing, its maw opened wide. Suddenly, Korvac was there, a length of pipe in his clawed hands. He brought it down on the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. The hybrid reeled, more stunned than hurt. James staggered to his feet, shaking his head to clear it. He looked to Korvac, a silent plan passing between them. Together they herded the creature back, their blows driving it towards the overloading reactor. The hybrid lashed out in fury, but they were faster, more agile. With a final effort, James slammed into the creature, sending it stumbling back into the crackling energy field. The hybrid spasmed as the reactor's fury consumed it, its flesh sloughing away in sheets of searing plasma. James rolled clear, his skin blistered by the heat. Korvac hauled him to his feet, dragging him towards the exit. Behind them, the reactor reached critical mass, a blinding light filling the chamber. They ran, warning klaxons blaring in their ears. Around them, Yadaran crew members fled in panic, all thoughts of stopping the intruders forgotten in the face of annihilation. Ahead, the shuttle bay beckoned, a promised escape. They stumbled aboard the nearest craft, Korvac's claws stabbing at the launch controls. The ship lurched as its engines roared to life, hurtling them out into the void. Behind them, the mothership bloated obscenely, its hull plates buckling. Then, with a soundless flash, it detonated, a newborn sun blazing in the night sky. The shockwave caught their shuttle, sending it tumbling end over end. James clung to his seat, the world spinning madly around him. Gradually, the craft righted itself, its stabilizers fighting against the maelstrom. James looked to Korvac, a haggard grin splitting his face. They had done it, against all odds they had. As the fiery remnants of the Yadaran mothership rained down upon the earth, James and Korvac found themselves thrust into the global spotlight. News of their heroic deeds spread like wildfire, igniting hope in the hearts of billions. The unlikely duo, once bitter adversaries, now stood as a shining example of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. World leaders clamored to honor the heroes, eager to capitalize on the newfound spirit of cooperation between humanity and the Yadaran rebels. In a grand ceremony at the United Nations headquarters in New York, James and Korvac took the stage to thunderous applause. James, his battle-worn face etched with a mixture of pride and sorrow, stepped up to the podium. "We stand here today not as conquerors but as survivors," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "The road we've traveled has been long and painful, fraught with sacrifice and loss. But through it all we have learned that our strength lies not in our differences, but in our common humanity." Korvac, his scales still bearing the scars of their final battle, nodded solemnly. "I have seen the best and worst of both our species," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled dignitaries, "and I have come to realize that we are not so different after all. We all desire peace, security, and a better future for our children." As the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, James and Korvac clasped hands, a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than any words. But even as they basked in the glow of their triumph, a sense of unease settled over the room. Suddenly a deafening explosion ripped through the chamber, sending debris and bodies flying. James and Korvac hit the ground, their instincts kicking into overdrive. Through the smoke and chaos, they spotted a group of heavily armed Yadaran soldiers, their weapons trained on the panicked crowd. At their head stood a familiar figure, the scientist's apprentice, his face twisted with rage and hatred. "You think you've won," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can betray our people and get away with it? Think again." James and Korvac sprang into action, their bodies moving in perfect sync. They charged the attackers, dodging laser blasts and returning fire with deadly precision. The chamber erupted into a war zone, screams and explosions echoing off the marble walls. James grappled with a Yadaran soldier, his fists pummeling the alien's scaly hide. Beside him, Korvac wielded his energy blaster with lethal efficiency, cutting down the attackers one by one. But even as they fought, James could sense that something was wrong. The apprentice was too calm, too confident, and then he saw it, a massive energy cannon, its barrel glowing with an eerie red light. Time seemed to slow as the apprentice took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. James lunged forward, desperate to stop the impending carnage, but he was too late. The cannon fired, a searing bolt of energy streaking towards the podium where the world leaders huddled in terror. James braced himself for the impact, his eyes squeezing shut. But the pain never came. Instead, he felt a heavy weight slam into him, knocking him to the ground. He opened his eyes to see Korvac lying atop him, his body smoking and charred. "Korvac!" James screamed, cradling the alien's head in his lap. Why did you do that?" Korvac coughed, a trickle of green blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. "Because it was the right thing to do," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You taught me that, James. You showed me what it means to be a hero." James shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, he muttered, his hands trembling as he tried to staunch the flow of blood. "You can't die. Not now. We've come too far." Korvac smiled weakly, his eyes already starting to glaze over. "It's okay, James," he said, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "I'm at peace. I know that with you. Earth is in good hands." James nodded, his jaw clenching with resolve. "I won't let you down, Korvac. I'll keep fighting, no matter what." Korvac's hand found James's, their fingers intertwining one last time. "I know you will," he whispered. "Goodbye, my friend." And with that, Korvac's eyes fluttered shut, his body going limp in James's arms. James let out a howl of anguish, his voice raw with grief and rage. Around him the battle still raged, but he barely noticed. All he could see was the lifeless form of his friend, the alien who had taught him so much about courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.